I'm fully aware that I'm likely to get negative feedback on this video from both sides of the coin, but before you yell at me, please hear me out and at least listen to what I have to say. Shipping, or the ways in which fandoms project relationships onto content creators and characters, is a very controversial topic in any fandom. This is all the more true in cases such as the DreamSMP fandom, and other such fandoms that have real people involved. This is to be expected considering how morally grey shipping is. I mean, wouldn't you feel at least a little bit uncomfortable if thousands of faceless teenagers were saying they think you and your close friend should be involved romantically, whether you have feelings for them or not? Well, hold that thought, because while this assessment of shipping isn't entirely incorrect, it also does not explore the full depth of the situation. Before we get into it, I just want to say that if you enjoy the content and want to support the channel, then consider subscribing. It's free and it helps a lot. You can always unsubscribe later if you change your mind. Thank you. Before I get into the more finite details of shipping and give you an idea of the bigger picture here, I will be the first to admit that in many cases, romantic shipping is indefensible. I can attempt to explain why it happens, but I cannot and will not even try to defend any shipping of minors or those who have otherwise specified they are uncomfortable with it. I think this is where many people get caught up though, because while shipping in those circumstances is obviously a horrible thing, that doesn't translate to all forms of shipping. Other ways I think shipping is used in a violating manner is when real people are put in not safe for work or explicit content, whether it's fanfiction or fan art or any other fan works, without their explicit consent. Consent in this case should take place before those fan works are created and not as a content creator having to defend their fans against an angry Twitter mob, such as when Dream had to do just that. I am also of the belief that any romantic angle on a real person's life should be approached carefully and with their permission. When I say permission, I do not mean a vague notion that the fan work would be deleted given the content creator was to express discomfort with similar works. I mean permission beforehand. As you can imagine, in the cases where the content creator later comes out and says that they are not in support of fan works being created involving them, it would be extremely uncomfortable for them to discover that these works exist, given that they aren't okay with it and just haven't said no yet. Remember, a lack of no is not a yes. You've heard all of these arguments probably hundreds of times before, which makes them no less important, but they do not cover why shipping is so prevalent, why it's actually quite important, and why it can't be and shouldn't be taken away entirely, especially if it's handled correctly. If you've seen media, like ever, you should know that the representation of not cis and not heterosexual people, let alone experiences and relationships those people might have, is very lacking. By very lacking, I mean you would be lucky to hear someone talk about non-cishet people without them being the butt of some bad joke before about 2010. Even now, the disproportionate amount of criticism shows and movies featuring LGBTQIA+ characters get is astonishing. I grew up going to a school where if you weren't straight and or cis, you were weird and a target for potential bullying. I mean, there wasn't a single out trans person in my entire school, and it wasn't a small one. It was an environment that kept you from being yourself through fear. As I also grew up being not straight, the only place I could look to for people I related to and people who understood what it was like to have this experience was on the internet. I think this is partly why we see so many of these ships being not straight, whether it's Dream Not Found, Skip Halo, Minx and Nikki. Fandoms mostly prefer LGBTQIA+ ships over straight ones. It's a world where people can write the stories they never got to see on mainstream television. A community of like-minded people in an otherwise hostile environment. Growing up LGBTQIA+ isn't easy, and a reprieve from that is welcomed by most. I think this, combined with the age of most of the people doing the shipping, is part of the reason that it can appear so ignorant and sometimes malicious to those who aren't a part of the community, and who don't understand that for so many, This is the only representation of themselves and relationships they relate to that they will ever get. Representation that is so important in our formative years. However, sadly this isn't the only reason we see so many LGBTQIA+ ships. You'll have to forgive me, this section is heavily censored, but YouTube age restriction is a bitch. As old as time itself it seems, fetishizing non-cis-het people is a huge problem in all media, especially media that is sometimes not safe for work. An extreme example of gay fetishization outside of fanworks is most lesbian, what I can't say without getting age restricted, but you know what I mean, it starts with a P, where situations involving women loving women relations are used solely to benefit the fantasies and desires of people who aren't in the community. This is big in not safe for work writing. Fanfictions that depict unsafe sexual practices for the sake of fantasy, unrealistic situations, no lubricant or prep, and often no consent, which is the most concerning, are all too common. More common, in fact, than healthy and safe relationships in this media. This tradition, or at least the popularization of it in fanworks, is likely to be able to be traced back to explicit comics and manga, where gay relationships are categorized incessantly into seme or uke, or essentially dominant and submissive, which I understand are terms used in the BDSM community, but that is not what I'm getting at here. These toxic ideas of what gay relationships are meant to be, or are in real life, leads to more harm than good. As an LGBT person myself, I can report how uncomfortable it feels when someone clearly sees you as a sexual object more than a person because of your orientation. It leads to this unrealistic idea of how non-cis-het people act. This is one of those things that is severe no matter if it is a real person or a fictional character being used in this way, because the problem lies largely in the subconscious thought it implants in its consumers' heads. Fetishization isn't only sexual either. The idea of these roles being so enforced onto LGBTQIA+ people is one that spreads to all aspects of relationships. Referring to a gay man as an uwu soft boy is actually quite offensive. It infantilizes and belittles gay people, whether the person means harm or not. It is extremely condescending when anyone, straight or otherwise, refers to you as a baby or as if you need protection. Like, ma'am, that is a 30-year-old woman trying to go out with her girlfriend. Leave her alone, please. This fetishization is also due in part to the fact that many fandoms are made up of teenagers, who are expectedly hormonal and discovering things about their own sexuality and navigating a whole world of new emotions regarding such. This can mean they don't understand the full depth of what they are doing, and how it could affect others. Now, when it comes to fictional characters, the way they are used in fanworks is a lot less sketchy, as there is no consent from the character needed and no one is harmed, as the person it's about doesn't really exist. Real people, or RPF, is a different story. Excluding my earlier points about consent and minors and other outstanding circumstances where it is obviously not okay to be making fanworks, there are other intricacies of doing so. One such point is the content creator's actual sexuality. I want you to consider this from your perspective. Close your eyes and imagine. You are a content creator. You are not straight, or not cis, and you understand how that puts you in potential jeopardy. People you know in real life know about your content, and if it became public that you aren't straight or aren't cis, you don't know how they would react. You could lose friends, you could be alienated from your family. Obviously not every coming out story is a bad one, but you don't know how people will react until the information is already out there and you can't take it back. Now imagine you get a donation asking about your sexuality, or whether you are cis or not. You have three options. You can, 1, ignore it and make whichever fan donated to you feel as though you didn't appreciate their donation, and may make people suspect you aren't straight or cis when you are not ready to let that information out. 2, lie and say you are straight or cis, having to lie to your fans and also your family and friends. Or 3, come out and risk losing people you know in real life, or putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation you might not be ready for yet. You see how none of these situations are good? This is the decision you risk forcing content creators into when you pressure them into telling you their sexuality or gender identity. Even if they are straight or cis, you have no way of knowing that, and putting that pressure on someone is unfair to say the least. If a content creator has not told you their sexuality, don't assume they are straight or cis. Don't assume they are not straight or cis. I promise you that if they aren't straight or cis and they are ready to tell you that information, if they want to tell you that information, and if it is safe for them to tell you that information, they will, in their own time. This goes for people in your life too. Don't stereotype, don't assume, don't pressure. Shipping can also pressure people in other ways, putting pressure on relationships or friendships because they now are forced to see their actions through a lens of romance. Whether they may have been comfortable being flirty or touchy or even just friendly to someone before in a platonic way, they may now rethink that due to external pressure, or feeling as though your actions are no longer platonic. In conclusion, shipping can be good. It can be very inclusive and help people find a community where they can explore who they are and stories they wouldn't otherwise get to due to their sexuality or gender identity. But it can also be handled very sloppily and can cause much more harm than good. I think both extremes of the opinions on this topic are toxic. You cannot accept all shipping without recognizing its flaws. But it is also extremely toxic to belittle those that like it in a healthy manner without looking into how it can be so helpful for people to be able to create the representation they never got to see. If you have any further points that you feel would add to this discussion, I implore you to leave them in the comments below. Try to remain civil though. Remember to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.